Hello, everyone. My name is Isabel, and my partner Aman is here too. And today, I'm going to be talking to you about data science and deep learning and ethics and so many really, really interesting things. And so, yeah, I'm presenting on behalf of a pretty large team. I am a student at the University of Virginia. And basically in this presentation, we're showing you preliminary results from a deep learning image analysis platform for automated data labeling using art objects from the open access Met collection, which is a very, very long, fancy way of saying we're talking, oh, there's Aman. Hi, Aman. We're talking about how kind of machine learning has helped make the huge open access collection of the Met more accessible and easier to use for common people. And I have titled this presentation, The Art of Data Storytelling, because I think not only can data science teach us a lot about information and art, but it can also show us a lot about our culture and ourselves. So just to little disclaimer, I'm a little bit nervous, so please bear with me. But a brief introduction. Basically, the Met has this huge online collection of art. It's about 500,000 pieces, and they wanted to make it openly accessible and easy to experience and interact with for common people, around the world. And so they partnered with the University of Virginia School of Data Science to create a machine learning model to help label these art pieces so they can be easily searched for and accessed by all types of people. Then we had 4 key goals. As I said, subject keywords was a central part of the tagging and labeling process. We used words like woman, man, tree, things like that. And you might think that we would use things more related to impressionism or specific artist names, and I will explain why that was not the best choice later in the presentation, so hold on to that piece of information. Obviously, we wanted the database to be easily discoverable and searchable by common people to increase user engagement and make it available and accessible to the widest possible audience, from people who have never had access to this art before to people who were common frequenters of the Met. So first step, data extraction and storage. Basically, the Met Museum API used Creative Commons 0 to make their huge database of art accessible to all people without copyright. And the metadata was stored in SQLite database. Metadata, which was basically information regarding the artist, region, tags, things like that. And there were a total of 49 variables, which was quite a few. But this is what's even more interesting is, as I said, almost 500,000 pieces. So how did we pare this down? Well, first, we looked at the objects that had an image URL, obviously very important. And then of those, only about 230,000 were small. And that, again, is a piece of relevant information, which I will be talking about later. Of those images, about 150,000 had tags. And what's interesting about the tags was that there were about 300,000 total tags, which shows you that many pieces had multiple tags attributed to them. And there was about 1,000 unique tags. So as I said before, woman, man, cat, stuff like that. What may surprise you is that we only used 23 of those tags. And the reason that we did this is because for a machine learning model, when you're looking at running through multiple images through kind of this model, enough images have to have the tag for the model to be able to learn how to identify the tag on its own. So we use the top 23 things, as I said, men, women, flowers, nothing like impressionists, things like that, which we'll talk about later. But now we're at data pre-processing. So we have these images, we've decided to use them, and now we need to make sure that all of them are ready to be run through the model. So first, we had to make sure that all of the dimensions were 224 by 224, which is why it was important to have small images. And that there was uniform aspect ratio. So basically, all of the dimensions of all of the images were uniform and the same. And so to do this, there was cropping, there was centering, a variety of different methods to make sure that all of the images were going to run through the model in the same way. And then I think this is really cool. So data augmentation is basically when you take an image and you flip it, you alter it slightly just so that even though the content is the same, it appears slightly different to the model, which prevents the model from becoming too linear and allows it to better identify tags on new images. So this is the big climax of kind of what we did. We used ResNet 50, which was pre-trained using ImageNet, which is a large online database of images. And that was used to classify images using the 23 labels that I mentioned previously from the Met dataset. And something that is important, and this number may surprise some of you, but our probability threshold for classification was 0.2, which means that if the model was figuratively 20% sure or identified at 20% likelihood or 20% of the time that a certain tag was on an image, then we consider that truth. And that then we fine-tuned our model, ran it through all of the images, and we received an accuracy of about 96%, which was very, very, very strong. So some of you may be thinking that this feels like the end of the project. Well, now what's even more interesting in my eyes is the ethics of the machine learning model. So question one that we have to ask, intellectual debt and why it's important. So there's a man named Jonathan Zittrain, who is a professor at Harvard Law, and he talks about intellectual debt in machine learning models and the idea of getting answers first and asking questions later, and how dangerous that is, because even though we're getting the results we want, we don't know why we're getting them. And eventually, in order to slightly alleviate some of this intellectual debt, we were able to use GradCams to look at the process of tag identification and labeling by the machine learning model, which I will talk about later. And the second concept, which was discussed by Jenna Burrell, who is a professor at UC Berkeley, is expert knowledge opacity. So that's basically the idea that if a model requires expertise or expert knowledge to create the data set or anything like that, then you run into some issues because in some way, shape, or form, it will be inaccessible to some people. And this is when I was talking about why some of the labels like cat, dog, horse, although they may not seem intuitive related to art, they're important because those avoid expert knowledge opacity and basically make it so that anyone could identify a horse or a cat or a dog in an image. Not everyone could identify what an impressionist piece looks like. So although we alleviated this ethical concern in this project, in the future, when we're looking at things like mood and genre and, things that require gold standard artistic interpretation, this will be a serious ethical concern. So as I said, we would get to the GradCams. So we used GradCam heat maps to highlight significant image features. So basically where the model was looking at placing a tag. So if these are birds and the ground truth is that they're birds, based on the heat map, you can tell that the machine learning model was identifying the wings of the bird specifically to be what is characteristic of a bird. So that kind of helps us understand the process of the model a little bit more. and as I said, alleviates some of that intellectual debt. So this is my favorite thing about this presentation because I find it really eye-opening. So these are obviously pictures of Native American men, and the ground truth, they were labeled as men, as they are, yet the model labeled them as women. And based on the GradCam heat maps, we can tell that the skirt-like dressing of the men is what caused this label to happen. And now, at this point in time, some may pause and think, you know, that's a problem with the model. The model has a bias. And it's true that the model has a bias, but the model would not have a bias if there wasn't already a bias to begin with in the art and in the collection. This is a vast, very large collection of pieces from multiple different eras and locations geographically and artists. And yet there is still gender bias, which tells us that although in our current culture, we would like to think of artistic expression as very individualistic, we are creating a mass culture with the art that is being produced that does produce something like identifiable gender bias in a model like this. So looking ahead, step one, also, I mean, obviously, I think everything's cool, but I think that this is really awesome. Clustering analysis and data mining. So basically, looking at how different types of art and different types of pieces will be grouped together. And will they be grouped together based on geographic region? I highly doubt it. Based on subject matter, based on artist. All of these things are important aspects to look at in the future, and especially when subclustering happens, where we're looking at multiple different artists who may both belong to the same era, or the same movement, like Impressionists. And finally, really looking forward, and I have a really big role in this next, not a huge role, but a big role in this next project, where we're working with the Aga Khan Museum and their art pieces to kind of do pretty much the same thing that we did with the Met art, but something that's really interesting is, you know, we saw that very clear gender bias appear in our model. And this museum and this art collection is based on Islamic art and is from a very confined geographical region. So examining the bias in this more culturally constrained data set is going to be really interesting, because it's very possible that our model could learn that, okay, in this culture, this is what a man looks like. And in this culture, this is what a woman looks like. And although those labels may be more accurate, they will definitely not be as translatable. So overall, these are our preliminary results for all of the different ways in which both we've considered the ethics of this machine learning model and the actual data that we received. And as I said, this data tells a story in a very, very wonderful way that allows us to kind of both examine how our bias is interpreting artificial intelligence and how artificial intelligence is interpreting our bias. So thank you so much. I really appreciate your time and your attention, and I will be available in the other kind of breakout room for questions later.